April 26, 1986. It is 1:23 in the morning. The control room of Reactor Number 4 at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant hums with the particular quiet of a building that has never once considered the possibility of its own destruction. Fluorescent light washes the instrument panels in a pale, institutional glow. Operators sit at their consoles in the unhurried way of men performing a task they have performed 100 times before. Buttons click. Dials hold steady. Steam moves through pipes with a low, satisfied murmur. The air smells faintly of machine oil and old coffee. Everything is normal. Everything is fine. Anatoly Dyatlov, deputy chief engineer, stands behind his operators with his arms crossed. He has been pushing this test for hours. The safety experiment they are running tonight is routine, a check of whether the turbines can generate enough power to keep the cooling pumps running during a brief shutdown. It has been done before. It will be done again. Dyatlov is impatient to finish it and go home. One of the operators glances at a gauge. His hand hesitates over the panel. He says nothing. Not yet. What no one in that room fully understands, what the instruments are only beginning to whisper, is that something has already gone wrong inside the reactor core. Not something visible. Not something you could point to. Something molecular. Something architectural. Something that the laws of physics have already decided, even if the men watching the numbers have not. The reactor is not stable. It has not been stable for several minutes. But the men in this room do not know that yet. They are about to find out. A second operator looks up from his console. His voice is calm, but something in his eyes isn't. He reports a reading that shouldn't be possible. Another operator checks his own instruments. The numbers don't match. They should match. They always match. Dyatlov waves a hand. It's a sensor error. Run the test. The order to press the button is given at 1:23 and 40 seconds. For 4 seconds, nothing happens. Then the building moves. It does not shake the way buildings shake in earthquakes, that familiar lateral rolling that the body instinctively recognizes. It moves from below. A deep, seismic shudder that travels up through the floor, through the soles of their shoes, into their bones. Something enormous is happening beneath them. Something that has no name yet in any language they speak. The alarms begin. Not one, dozens. They do not scream in unison but in overlapping cascades, each one announcing a different catastrophe, a different system in distress, a different thing that should not be happening but is. The operators move fast now, hands flying across consoles, trying to find the override, trying to push the emergency shutdown rods into the core, trying to stop whatever is accelerating below them. But the rods, the graphite-tipped control rods designed to slow the reaction, do not descend. They jam. And in the fraction of a second that it takes to understand that the rods have jammed, the reactor does what a reactor should never be allowed to do. It goes prompt critical. The power in the core surges to 100 times its maximum capacity in less than 3 seconds. The water inside the cooling channels flashes instantly to steam. And then reactor number 4 explodes. The first explosion tears through the reactor building like it is made of paper. 2,000 tons of steel and concrete lid, a piece of the plant that weighs more than the Eiffel Tower, is thrown into the air and comes down at an angle, exposing the burning core beneath it. A second explosion follows, possibly a prompt criticality, possibly a steam explosion. Scientists will argue about this for decades, but the effect is the same. The roof of the reactor hall disappears. Chunks of graphite, pieces of the core itself, scatter across the plant grounds in a wide radius, glowing with a heat that no material should be able to sustain. Fire erupts in multiple locations simultaneously, not orange fire, not the fire of wood or fuel, but something brighter and stranger and more violent, fire that contains within it a color no one on the plant grounds has words for. And above the open wound of Reactor 4, something rises into the darkness of the Ukrainian sky that looks, to the few who glimpse it in those first seconds, like a pillar of blue-violet light reaching upward toward the stars. Ionizing radiation, made visible by the atmosphere it is ripping apart. A column of death, beautiful and alien and utterly silent. Radiation, invisible, odorless, without weight or sound or texture, pours into the night at a rate of thousands of roentgens per hour. It moves with the wind. It settles on the grass. It drifts across the roof of the turbine hall where firefighters will arrive within minutes and stand without protection, touching glowing graphite with their bare hands, not understanding what they are touching. In the control room, the men who survived the explosion stand among broken glass and hanging ceiling tiles, staring at instruments that have gone completely dark. Leonid Tarptunov, the young reactor operator who pressed the emergency button, is shaking. Alexander Akimov, the shift foreman, refuses to believe what his instruments were showing before they died. He calls the shift supervisor and says the same 4 words that will echo through every inquiry, every trial, every history book written about this night. The reactor is intact. And in that moment, the reactor stopped being a machine and became a wound. What happened next is a story that moves in 2 directions simultaneously, outward, as radiation spreads across a continent, and inward, as the human mind struggles to accept what it cannot see and does not want to believe. The first firefighters arrive at 1:28 in the morning, 5 minutes after the explosion. They come from the Chernobyl plant's own fire brigade. Lieutenant Pravik is 23 years old. His men park their trucks and climb toward the burning roof of the turbine hall. They can see the fire. They can see the graphite, dark, irregular chunks scattered across the rooftop. Some of it is still glowing. One of the firefighters picks up a piece with his hand. It feels warm, he will later say. Like a piece of coal that hasn't quite gone out. He does not know that he is holding a fragment of the reactor core. He does not know that what he is holding is emitting approximately 1,000 roentgens per hour of radiation. A dose of 400 roentgens, sustained over a short time, is enough to kill half the people exposed to it. This man is holding something 10 times more lethal than that, with his bare hand, in the dark, while his Geiger counter, if he even has one, reads off scale and he assumes it is broken. The dosimeters carried by the firefighters that night are rated to 1,000 microroentgens per second. The radiation on the roof is thousands of times higher than that. The needles pin immediately. The men look at their instruments, see what they believe are low readings, and keep climbing. But what they didn't know was this: a dosimeter that reads off scale doesn't tell you the radiation is low. It tells you the radiation is beyond what the instrument can measure. There is a crucial difference. And tonight, that difference is killing them. Within an hour, the firefighters begin to feel sick. It comes quickly, the way acute radiation sickness always comes. First nausea, a metallic taste in the back of the throat, a strange warmth spreading beneath the skin. One man vomits behind a truck. Another sits down because his legs feel wrong. They tell each other it's the smoke, the exertion, the heat. It is not the smoke. Their skin, in the places directly exposed to the radiation, is beginning to change color. Not immediately, that will take hours. But the invisible damage is already complete. The high-energy particles are already ripping through their DNA, through the walls of their blood vessels, through the delicate membranes of their lungs. Their bodies are already dying in ways that will take weeks to become visible. Lieutenant Pravik will be dead within 15 days. Inside the destroyed reactor building, 2 men, Valery Kodemchuk and Vladimir Shashanok, are already gone. Kodemchuk's body will never be recovered. The reactor is his tomb. Shashanok, caught under a collapsed beam in the aftermath of the explosion, will die in the hospital in a matter of hours. They are the first. They will not be the last. The plant director, Viktor Bryukhanov, is awakened by a phone call and arrives on site shortly after the explosion. He looks at the damage. He looks at the destroyed building. And then he writes a report to Moscow stating that the radiation level at the plant is 3.6 roentgens per hour. The actual level, in parts of the plant, is 20,000 roentgens per hour. He uses the number from the one functioning dosimeter on site, a low-range instrument that immediately read off scale and was therefore believed to be showing low readings. He either does not know the truth, or he cannot say it. In the Soviet system, there is very little difference between those 2 states of being. The report goes to Moscow. Officials read 3.6 roentgens per hour and make the calculation that this is serious but manageable. An accident. Not a catastrophe. The word they will resist for days, The word that carries with it implications of systemic failure, of a system that cannot be trusted, is meltdown. They do not use that word. Not yet. 3 kilometers from the reactor, the city of Pripyat sleeps. Pripyat is not a village, not some forgotten agricultural settlement scraped out of the Ukrainian steppe. It is a young, prosperous Soviet city, built specifically to house the workers of the Chernobyl plant and their families. 50,000 people live here. There are schools, a culture palace, a fun fair with a Ferris wheel that is scheduled to open for May Day in 4 days' time. There are swimming pools and music schools and a soccer stadium. The streets are wide and lined with young trees. The apartment buildings are full of sleeping children. By 2 in the morning on April 26, 1986, the air above Pripyat is heavily contaminated with radioactive particles. Not visibly. Not with any smell. The air looks and smells exactly as it always does. But it carries within it something that will destroy the thyroid glands of children, something that will quietly incubate in the bodies of women who are pregnant, something that will settle in the soil and the water and the food chain for generations. No one in Pripyat has been warned. The city is asleep. Windows are open in the April warmth. Children are breathing the night air. Somewhere in the city, a wedding is still being celebrated. Photographs will later show the dancing and the toasting, the groom lifting his bride, the guests laughing, all of it happening 3 kilometers from the worst nuclear accident in human history, all of them backlit by a glow on the horizon that some of them step outside to admire, believing it is an unusually large and beautiful fire at the plant, not understanding that they are absorbing lethal doses just by standing there, watching. By morning, people in Pripyat are outside. It is a Saturday. The sun is shining. Children go to school because no one has told them not to. Some play outside, in parks, in sandboxes. Radioactive iodine settles on the grass. It will settle in the milk of cows grazing in surrounding villages. It will settle in the bodies of children whose thyroid glands are particularly hungry for iodine, the way all children's thyroids are. The evacuation of Pripyat does not begin on the morning of April 26th. It does not begin that afternoon. The city is not evacuated for 36 hours after the explosion, 36 hours during which its 50,000 residents go about their lives, breathe the air, drink water that is being contaminated even as they drink it, and trust their government because the alternative is too disorienting to consider. This is the terrifying part. Not the explosion. Not the fire. This, the ordinary Saturday morning in a city already being destroyed, where nobody knows and nobody is telling them. The phone call from Bryukhanov to Moscow sets in motion a machinery of denial so complete, so reflexive, so deeply embedded in the structures of Soviet governance, that it will function almost automatically for the next 36 hours, minimizing, delaying, obscuring, reshaping the truth into something the system can manage. This is where the disaster became unstoppable. Not in the reactor. In the reports. The Communist Party system that governs every aspect of Soviet life has a particular relationship with catastrophe. Bad news does not travel upward. It is transformed on its way up, rounded down, softened, reframed. A man who reports disaster is a man who has failed to prevent disaster, and failure has consequences in this system that most people will do anything to avoid. So the reports that travel from the plant to regional authorities to Moscow are progressively less alarming than the reality they describe. By the time they reach the men who have the power to order a mass evacuation, the numbers have been so thoroughly distorted that the response is measured, cautious, and catastrophically insufficient. Boris Sherbina, a deputy prime minister, is dispatched to Chernobyl to lead the government commission. He is a man of enormous competence in his own domain, industrial infrastructure, energy production. He is not a nuclear physicist. He arrives at the scene on the evening of April 26th and begins trying to piece together what has happened. He talks to Bryukhanov. He talks to plant managers. He talks to local party officials. None of them give him the full picture, partly because they don't have it, and partly because having it and saying it are two different things in this country. It takes the intervention of Valery Legasov, a genuine scientist, an academician from the Kurchatov Institute, a man who understands what RBMK reactors are capable of, to begin the process of telling the truth. Legasov arrives at the scene and immediately grasps the scale of what has happened. He understands that the reactor is not damaged. It is gone. He understands that the core is open to the sky. He understands that the graphite fire burning above the reactor is sending a continuous plume of radioactive material into the atmosphere, where it will travel with the wind for thousands of kilometers. He understands all of this. And then he has to convince a system that does not want to be convinced. But what they didn't know was how far the fallout was already traveling. On the morning of April 28, 2 days after the explosion, radiation alarms begin triggering at a nuclear power plant in Sweden. The plant at Forsmark, 1400 kilometers from Chernobyl, detects contamination on the shoes of arriving workers. They shut down and evacuate, assuming the leak is in their own facility. It is not. Swedish scientists trace the contamination to its source. It is coming from the east. It is coming from the Soviet Union. Sweden calls Moscow. Moscow denies everything. The denial holds for approximately 2 hours. Then, under pressure from the evidence gathering around them, from the plume that is now measurable across Scandinavia and Central Europe, from a reality that has simply become too large to contain, Soviet television announces, in a broadcast lasting 14 seconds, that an accident has occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and that measures are being taken. 14 seconds. For an event that will contaminate an area the size of France. In Moscow, the special clinic of Hospital Number 6 is quietly being prepared. The patients begin arriving by plane on the morning of April 26, the most severely irradiated firefighters and plant workers flown directly from the site. The hospital's director, Angelina Gaskova, is one of the world's foremost experts in acute radiation syndrome. She has seen this before, in the quiet catastrophes of the Soviet nuclear program that never made the newspapers. She recognizes what she is looking at when these men walk through her doors. Some of them walk in themselves. Some need help. They are nauseous, vomiting, disoriented. Some have burns on their hands and faces from the intense beta radiation at the reactor site. Their skin in some places has turned the deep, specific red of radiation burns, not the red of sunburn, not the red of fire, but something deeper, something that radiates its own heat from beneath the skin's surface. The nurses and doctors who treat them in these first hours are also receiving radiation exposure. The patients themselves are emitting radiation. Their bodies have absorbed so much ionizing energy that they have become, in a technical sense, radioactive. No one tells the nurses this. Some will suffer health consequences for years afterward. None of them refuse to help. Lyudmila Ignatenko sits by her husband's bed. Vasily Ignatenko is a firefighter, one of the first men on the roof. She has been told he is ill. She has not been told what is killing him. She holds his hand. She kisses his forehead. The nurses tell her to stop. They don't fully explain why. She holds his hand anyway. In the weeks that follow, she will watch her husband disappear. Not quickly. Slowly. Radiation sickness is a process, not an event. The body does not die all at once. It unravels. The cells responsible for replication fail first, the gut lining, the bone marrow, the blood-forming tissues. The immune system collapses. Then infections begin, infections the body has no means to fight. The skin, in the places most exposed, begins to break down, to slough away. To reveal what is beneath. 28 of the firefighters and plant workers die within the first 3 months. They die in ways that are difficult to describe and impossible to forget. They are buried in lead-lined coffins, sealed and weighted, because their bodies are too radioactive to handle any other way. Their graves in Moscow are marked with simple stones that say very little about what happened to the men beneath them. The terrifying part was, the explosion was only the beginning. The buses come to Pripyat at 2 in the afternoon on April 27. 1,100 buses, mobilized from across the Kiev region, arriving in a convoy that stretches for kilometers. The residents of Pripyat are told over loudspeakers that there has been an accident at the plant and that they should prepare for a temporary evacuation. They are told to bring documents, money, and enough clothes for 3 days. They are told, and this is the cruelest detail, the one that echoes through every testimony given by the people who lived it, they are told they will be back. 3 days. Just 3 days. People lock their doors. They leave food on tables, half-eaten meals, grocery lists on refrigerator doors. They leave toys on apartment floors, books open to the pages they were reading, photographs on the walls, pets in apartments because pets were not mentioned in the announcement and people assumed they would return to feed them. They leave entire lives in a state of suspension, like a film stuck on a single frame, because they have been told to believe, that this is temporary. The evacuation takes approximately 3.5 hours. 50,000 people moving through the streets in an orderly, bewildered column. Children hold parents' hands. Elderly residents are helped down staircases. The line of buses stretches out of the city and down the highway toward Kiev, and as they go, people look back through the bus windows at the city that raised them, at the Ferris wheel that was never opened, at the reactor building in the distance, where the smoke is still rising. They are never coming back. Most of them will understand this within weeks. Some of them will understand it within months. Some of them, the ones who love Pripyat most, the ones who were born there and raised their children there, will refuse to understand it for years. They will apply for permits to return. They will write letters to party officials. Some of them will eventually return illegally, elderly people who decide that living in the exclusion zone is preferable to living elsewhere without the place that made them who they are. They will tend small gardens inside the contaminated soil. They will live among the ruins of their own city. The Ferris wheel still stands in Pripyat. No one has ever ridden it. Radiation has a quality that sets it apart from every other environmental catastrophe in human history. It is entirely, completely invisible. You cannot see it. You cannot smell it. You cannot taste it, feel it on your skin, hear it with any sense that evolution gave you. You can walk through a field thick with radioactive contamination and feel the sun on your face and smell the flowers and hear the birds, assuming the birds are still there, and your body will give you no signal that anything is wrong. None. The instruments that detect radiation are external, machines, not sensors. And in the early days of the Chernobyl disaster, many of those instruments were reading off scale, or missing, or in the hands of officials who had been told what readings to report. This invisibility is not merely terrifying in a philosophical sense. It has practical, catastrophic consequences. People cannot evacuate from something they cannot perceive. They cannot protect their children from something their bodies give them no warning about. They continue to breathe, to eat, to drink water, to let their children play outside, because every sensation they possess tells them that the world is safe. By the time they understood the danger, it was already inside them. In the villages surrounding Chernobyl, beyond the immediate evacuation zone, life continues almost normally for weeks. Farmers take their animals to pasture on contaminated grass. Women hang laundry outside. Children wade in contaminated streams. The May Day celebrations proceed, including in Kiev, a city of more than 2 million people, where the party leadership decides that cancelling the outdoor celebrations would provoke panic and is therefore impossible. The parade goes ahead. Children march in it. Their parents watch from the sidewalks. A light breeze moves through the city. That same light breeze is carrying radioactive particles from the north. The thyroid cancer rates in Ukraine and Belarus will begin rising within a few years. In children who were young in 1986, who played outside on contaminated days, who drank contaminated milk, the rate of thyroid cancer will be nearly 100 times higher than baseline. This is not disputed. This is measured. This is one of the cleanest, most unambiguous medical signals to emerge from the disaster. And it comes from the most vulnerable population, the children who had no idea they were being exposed. Their parents had no idea either. They were never told. By the first days of May, a new terror has emerged, one that the men working on the disaster cannot ignore. The reactor core is still burning. The graphite fire continues to generate an enormous heat load beneath thousands of tons of debris. And beneath that heat, beneath the debris, beneath the reactor floor, is water. Not a small amount of water. The cooling pools beneath the reactor contain millions of liters of water used in the plant's operations, and the burning core is slowly, steadily melting its way downward toward it. If the molten reactor core reaches those water pools, the resulting steam explosion would be immediate and catastrophic. The estimates being made in the early days suggest it could be large enough to destroy the remaining reactors at the plant, to scatter a much larger quantity of radioactive material across a much wider area, to render Kiev, a city of millions, uninhabitable. The possibility of a second explosion, exponentially worse than the first, hangs over every decision being made. And then, something even worse happened. Beneath the reactor, there are 3 valves that drain the water from the cooling pools. They are submerged. The chamber is flooded. Radiation levels in the area are fatal in minutes. And someone has to go in. 3 men volunteer: Alexei Ananenko, Valery Bespalov, and Boris Baranov. Ananenko and Bespalov know where the valves are. Baranov carries the lamp. They put on wetsuits. They are given dosimeters. They walk into the flooded, pitch-dark, highly radioactive chamber beneath Reactor Number 4, guided by a single light, wading through water of unknown contamination, navigating by memory and training to find 3 valves in the dark. They find them. They open them. The water begins to drain. The 3 men emerge. They are alive. The feared steam explosion does not occur. Ananenko and Bespalov are still alive today. The story that circulated for years, that all 3 men died within days of the mission, that they sacrificed themselves heroically and were buried in lead coffins, is not accurate. But the courage required to walk into that flooded chamber, knowing what was above them, knowing what the water might contain, knowing that the instruments cannot fully measure what they are walking into, that part is entirely true. They walked into the dark because someone had to. Above the open core, the helicopters come. The decision is made to smother the burning reactor from the air, to dump sand, boron, clay, and lead directly onto the open wound, to seal it, to stop the release of radiation into the atmosphere. The pilots who fly these missions fly without shielding. They fly over the core repeatedly, hovering, releasing their loads, banking away, returning. Some flights take the pilots directly over the exposed reactor, which emits radiation intense enough to affect aircraft electronics. Each pass takes approximately 2 minutes over the reactor. The pilots fly those 2 minutes knowing, some of them with more clarity than others, what they are absorbing. They are told the doses are acceptable. Some of them believe this. Some of them fly the missions anyway, with whatever belief is necessary to make the next run, and the next, and the next. By early May, more than 1,000 helicopter sorties have been flown. Enormous quantities of material are dropped onto the core. For a time, it appears to be working. The radiation release seems to decrease. Then the scientists realize that the weight of the material being dropped is actually compressing the core, increasing the heat, accelerating the burning. The intervention is making things worse. The strategy is abandoned and reconceived. The problem keeps changing shape. Every time a solution is found, the disaster reveals a new dimension, a new threat, a new way in which it refuses to be contained. This is what makes Chernobyl so particular, so haunting. It is not a disaster with a clear end point. It is a disaster that keeps becoming itself. If the burning reactor continues to melt downward, through the base of the containment structure, through the soil below, it could reach the water table. Groundwater contamination at this scale would potentially affect the rivers, the reservoirs, the drinking water of millions of people across Ukraine and beyond. The possibility is not remote. It is being actively modeled by scientists who are doing their calculations with mounting urgency. The solution, decided upon with Soviet directness, is to dig a tunnel beneath the reactor. Miners are brought from the Donbass coalfields, men who have spent their careers underground, who know the mechanics of tunneling, who understand darkness and close spaces and the particular psychology of work that has no room for hesitation. They arrive by the hundreds. They are told they are here to dig a tunnel beneath a damaged nuclear reactor. They are given dosimeters. They are told their work is essential. The conditions are unlike anything they have experienced in the mines. The heat, generated by the burning reactor above them, is extreme, far beyond what normal mining equipment can manage. The miners strip off their shirts. They work in relay teams, each team underground for a limited time before rotating out. The ground itself is warm beneath their boots. They cannot see the reactor. They can only feel its heat, pressing down on the earth above them, while they dig toward its base. They dig more than 150 meters of tunnel in a matter of weeks. When they break through into the space beneath the reactor, a heat exchange system is installed to prevent the molten core from progressing further. Whether it is ultimately necessary, whether the core was ever truly going to reach the water table, is a question scientists continue to debate. But the miners dug the tunnel anyway. They went under the burning reactor because the alternative was to leave the possibility open. Many of them are sick in the years that follow. Some die in ways their families believe are connected to those weeks underground. The Soviet state does not always agree. The Soviet state has different numbers, different conclusions, different stories. The miners have their bodies. The word used for the workers who are sent to clean up the disaster is liquidators. It is a word that sounds clinical, organizational, neutral. It describes something else. Over the next several years, more than 600,000 people will be classified as liquidators: soldiers, firefighters, construction workers, miners, scientists, helicopter crews, bus drivers, and ordinary men conscripted from across the Soviet Union and sent to the most contaminated zone in human history to perform the work of cleanup. They decontaminate buildings. They bulldoze villages. They bury contaminated soil in trenches. They kill animals. They do the work that machines cannot do, or cannot do fast enough, or cannot do precisely enough. The roof workers occupy a particular place in the history of the disaster. The roof of the turbine hall is covered with graphite from the explosion, actual pieces of the reactor core, emitting radiation at levels that will give a man a maximum allowable annual dose in roughly 90 seconds. Robots are sent to clean the roof. The radiation destroys their electronics. They stop working. Human beings are sent instead. Each roof worker is given a maximum exposure time of 90 seconds. They climb to the roof in their protective clothing, lead vests, respirators, rubber suits, which offer only partial protection against the radiation levels present. They work for 90 seconds. They throw graphite off the roof with shovels. They run. They are rotated out and replaced by the next man. The men refer to themselves as bio-robots. This is what they have become. The government later certifies that their doses were within acceptable limits. The men's bodies tell a different story. By the time they understood the danger, it was already inside them. By the autumn of 1986, the decision has been made to encase the destroyed reactor in concrete. Not forever. Nothing this massive can be guaranteed forever, but for now, for a generation, for long enough to reduce the immediate threat while longer-term solutions are imagined. The structure they build is called the sarcophagus. It is the largest nuclear containment structure in the world. It is built by liquidators working in rotation, limiting their exposure to minutes per shift, constructing something of extraordinary complexity under conditions of extraordinary danger. The concrete is poured in layers, reinforced, shaped around the ruins of a building that no human being can safely enter. The sarcophagus is completed in November 1986. It seals within it approximately 200 tons of nuclear fuel, reactor core material, graphite, structural steel, all of it melted together in a substance that scientists call lava or corium, that has flowed through the base of the reactor and hardened in the rooms below. Some of this material is shaped like a massive brown formation that workers who see it call the elephant's foot. It emits enough radiation to kill an unprotected person within minutes. The elephant's foot is still there. It is still hot. It will be radioactive for thousands of years. Long after the last person who witnessed the explosion has died, after the last liquidator has died, after the last child who played in Pripyat on the morning of April 26th has died, it will still be there, in the dark, under the concrete, generating heat. The sarcophagus itself, built in a matter of months, under impossible conditions, with imprecise equipment and rotating workforces, was never meant to last forever. Engineers knew from the beginning that it was cracking, that it was leaking, that it was a temporary solution to a permanent problem. 30 years later, an international effort would fund and build a new safe confinement, an enormous steel arch, 108 meters tall and 257 meters wide, slid into place over the original sarcophagus on rails. The new safe confinement is designed to last 100 years. After 100 years, a new decision will need to be made. Only now, after the deaths, after the evacuation, after the entombment, Is it possible to explain what actually happened inside reactor number 4? The RBMK reactor, designed and built in the Soviet Union, had a fundamental flaw that was known to some nuclear engineers and classified as a state secret. It was known as the positive void coefficient. In most reactor designs, when the cooling water inside the reactor heats up and begins to turn to steam, creating voids where liquid once was, the reaction naturally slows down. The physics work in the reactor's favor. The reactor is inherently self-limiting. The RBMK worked differently. In this reactor, under certain conditions, low power, specific configurations of control rods, the creation of steam voids caused the reaction to accelerate rather than slow down. The more steam, the more power. The more power, the more steam. A runaway feedback loop with no natural ceiling. There was also the matter of the control rods themselves. Their tips were made of graphite, a moderator, a material that actually speeds up the nuclear reaction, rather than neutron-absorbing material. When an operator pushed the emergency shutdown button and the rods began to descend into the core, the graphite tips entered the reactor first. For a few critical seconds, instead of slowing the reaction, they accelerated it. This was also known. It was also classified. The operators in reactor number 4's control room on the night of April 26 had not been told. They pressed the emergency shutdown button believing it would save the reactor. Instead, it was the last thing they did before the explosion. The men in that control room, Dyatlov, who pushed for the test, Akimov, who believed the reactor was intact, Toptunov, who pressed the button, they were operating a machine with hidden flaws, following procedures designed around a misunderstanding of what the reactor could do. Some of them made bad decisions under pressure. Some of them made reasonable decisions with the information they had. The question of blame, assigned at a trial in 1987, where plant workers were convicted and sentenced, has never been fully resolved, because blame implies that better individuals would have produced a different outcome. And this is not obviously true. The system was broken long before the reactor was. Valery Legasov returns from Chernobyl fundamentally changed. He has spent the months following the accident as the Soviet Union's chief scientific representative to the International Atomic Energy Agency, presenting the findings, explaining the disaster to the world. He has done this with remarkable candor, more candor than the Soviet system ordinarily permits, enough candor that some of his colleagues view his presentations in Vienna as a betrayal. He has told the world that the RBMK has design flaws. He has told the world more truth than a Soviet official is supposed to tell. He has also absorbed significant radiation during the time he spent at the Chernobyl site. His health has been affected. But what has affected him more, perhaps, is the knowledge he carries, of what was known and concealed, of how the system he served produced this catastrophe, of the lives lost in its service, of the names of the men who died on rooftops and in hospital beds and in tunnels beneath a burning reactor. On April 27, 1988, 2 years and 1 day after the explosion, Valery Legasov records his memoirs on audio cassette. He speaks for hours, laying out what happened, what he knows, what he believes. He places the tapes where they will be found. Then he hangs himself in his apartment in Moscow. He is the first of 2 reactor operators and several scientists and officials to die by their own hand in the years following the disaster. Men who knew what had happened and could not live inside the silence required to contain it. The tapes are found. They are listened to. Eventually, they are published. The zone of alienation, the 30-kilometer exclusion zone established around the plant, still exists today. Within it, Pripyat stands as it was left on April 27, 1986, slowly being consumed by the forest that has grown up around it. Trees push through apartment floors. Moss covers the walls of the school where children left their backpacks in the middle of lessons. The hospital still holds the firefighters' clothing, the suits and boots they stripped off in the emergency room, so radioactive that they were left in the basement, where they remain. The Ferris wheel still stands. The amusement park is overgrown. Dossiers of children's drawings curl on desks in empty classrooms. The forest that has grown up in the abandoned zone has been called the Red Forest, because after the explosion, the pine trees closest to the reactor turned red and died, killed by the radiation they absorbed. The dead trees were bulldozed and buried. New trees have grown in their place. The zone has, in some ecological sense, recovered, or at least adapted. Species that were driven out by humans before the accident have returned. Wolves, wild boar, horses, lynx. The absence of people has, in certain measurable ways, been good for the ecosystem. But the soil is still contaminated. The water is still monitored. The spent nuclear fuel and corium beneath the new safe confinement will remain radioactive for periods of time that exceed the entire recorded history of human civilization. The exclusion zone is not temporary. The name was chosen because it is neutral, administrative, manageable sounding. What it describes is a place that human beings created and then had to leave. Permanently. Because of 47 seconds. 47 seconds is how long the uncontrolled chain reaction lasted before the explosion. From the moment the power began to surge to the moment the reactor destroyed itself. 47 seconds for a chain of events set in motion by design flaws, institutional secrecy, a culture of denial, and the particular human tendency to believe that the worst cannot happen because it has not happened yet. The Soviet Union survived Chernobyl by approximately 5 years. Whether the disaster caused the collapse is debated. Gorbachev himself would later say that Chernobyl was perhaps the real cause of the Soviet Union's implosion, more than any economic factor, more than any political pressure. It cracked something. Not the buildings. The belief. The belief that the system worked. The belief that the authorities knew what they were doing. The belief that silence was safety. Once you have seen your government stand at the border of a catastrophe and tell you there is nothing to worry about, you see every subsequent reassurance differently. You hear something underneath the words. A hollow sound. The sound of a wall that has already cracked, being painted over by someone who needs you not to notice. There are still more than 400 nuclear reactors operating in the world today. They operate in countries with strong regulatory agencies and in countries without them. They are operated by experienced engineers and by the perpetual organizational entropy of large human institutions. They are built on risk assessments that have proved accurate so far, which is not the same as proving them accurate in general. They are run by governments and corporations that have interests that do not always align with the interests of the people who live downwind of them. None of this means catastrophe is inevitable. It does not mean the people running these systems are not doing their best. It does not mean that another Chernobyl is waiting. It means only this: somewhere in the world right now, there is a control room. There are operators at their consoles. There are instruments reading nominal. There are supervisors who are confident in the test they are running tonight. There are buildings full of people sleeping 3 kilometers away who have been told everything is fine. And there is a reactor, humming in the dark, patient and indifferent, that knows something they do not. The instruments cannot measure what they have not been calibrated to find. And the core does not need to be understood to be dangerous. It only needs to be underestimated.